I'm standing in this beautiful spot in Skyrim and I have a question. Can you actually live a simple 9 to 5 life as a woodcutter in Skyrim? Just chopping wood for 8 hours a day, eating, getting some rest, staying clean and having a bit of fun in the evenings, especially on weekends. In reality, saving up for a house without a loan is tough. And even with one, it's still not easy. So it got me thinking, is Skyrim still a place where honest, simple work can get you a decent life and maybe even a house? Meet Olaf, a humble woodcutter with no gold. Just some clothes, a couple of torches and an axe. I decided to spend 7 days in his shoes to see how much I can earn and save after covering all the basics. Can I afford essentials like food, rent, a bit of shopping, some entertainment and maybe even a weekend trip? Let's dive in and find out. I'm starting in Riverwood with survival mode enabled. So, the plan is to kick things off at 8 am and work until 5 pm from Monday to Friday. I decided to start work at 8 am instead of 9 am because I wanted to squeeze in an hour for lunch. If I'm not working, I'm not earning, right? Those 8 hours of work include both chopping and selling firewood. I decided to chop wood until I had 24 pieces as I can't carry too much more and then leave it underground to chop again. Gotta keep it realistic. If I can't carry more, I have to put it somewhere. Around 12 pm I took a break, but before that I sold all the firewood. I had 4 batches to sell, so it took me a little while, especially since I had some trouble finding hot for the first time. Finally, break time. I headed to the inn to grab some food. I want to keep my diet pretty balanced, as much as possible of course. Olaf needs plenty of protein because he puts a lot of strength into his work. So, a venison chop was a perfect choice. And I couldn't forget some veggies for health. Grilled leeks and baked potatoes were on the menu too. Olaf enjoyed his meal outside since the weather was awesome that day. He spent the rest of his lunch break sitting on a bridge eating and relaxing. After that, he headed back to work. By the time 5 pm rolled around, I chopped and sold 104 pieces of firewood, a bit more than before lunch. Feeling hungry, Olaf had some bread and an apple by the river, taking a moment to relax and enjoy the peaceful surroundings. Olaf spent the rest of the day hanging out at the tavern. It's Blue Monday, just like every Monday for Olaf, so he bought a lottery ticket, hoping for some luck and a cash prize that could change his life. He won, but it was just a book. He also played dice with Delphine. He won a few rounds, but overall, he ended up losing a bit of money. Olaf hung out with some folks, enjoying the music, drinking ale and having his last meal of the day. He even tried to hit on a girl he liked, but she wasn't interested in spending time with him. At the end of the day, he cleaned up and relaxed in a hot steam bath. I installed a mod that adds baths to every tavern. After a while, Olaf put on his pajamas, rented a room and read the book he won before drifting off to sleep. Overall, that day he sold 200 pieces of firewood, earning 1000 gold. After all his expenses, Olaf saved 836 gold. Not bad, considering how much food he bought. Olaf had a serious sweet tooth, so the next morning he started his day with an apple pie for breakfast, paired with a jug of milk. By the way, look at that poor Embry. It doesn't look like the best place to sleep, but maybe he enjoyed the smell of freshly baked goodies drifting through the air. Since it was still early, Olaf spent some time warming up by the fire pit before heading off to work. The day was pretty dark and foggy, but at least it wasn't raining. During his lunch break at the tavern, he enjoyed a butter and honey nut treat. That day turned out to be super productive for Olaf. Probably his most effective day of the entire week. Maybe the sweets gave him a boost of energy. He managed to chop and sell 216 pieces of firewood, earning a solid 1080 gold. Feeling pumped after work, Olaf decided to go for a run. He threw on some special gear. Okay, it was just the same clothes he wore at night since I couldn't find anything better. He set off toward the lake, planning for a quick hour-long jog, but he wasn't exactly the fastest runner. His heart rate kept spiking and he had to slow down frequently, so it ended up taking him an hour and a half. For me, the most important thing after finishing a run is taking a hot shower and sipping on some warm tea, as it helps prevent getting sick. Unfortunately, there was no hot beverage to be found in Skyrim, so Olaf grabbed a bottle of wine instead and headed to the bath. He cleaned himself up thoroughly and enjoyed the wine while he relaxed. He considered renting a room, but it turned out that the money he spent yesterday was enough to cover his stay for the next night. He sat on the bed with another bottle of wine, and when hunger hit, he went for something hearty: roasted goat leg and grilled chicken breast, with an apple for some vitamins, and of course ale. No veggies this time. After all that drinking, Olaf felt brave enough to approach a local girl he'd had his eye on, Mabrel. But unfortunately, he wasn't the smoothest talker, and she didn't seem interested in spending time with him. He even tried to tip her, thinking it might charm her a bit, but all he got in return was an old meat. No smile and no time spent together. Feeling a bit down after his failed attempt, Olaf took a seat by the fire with his drink, hoping to forget his disappointment. He went to bed relatively early, exhausted from a long day of hard work, a challenging run, and not so great flirting. After that day, he had nearly 1,800 gold in his pocket. The next morning, Olaf decided to have breakfast by the river instead of at the tavern. He kept it simple with cheese sandwiches and an apple. Starting the day by the water turned out to be a great idea. But no matter what he did, Olaf just couldn't get Mabrel out of his head. She kept popping into his head, and at some point she wandered near him while he was working. Feeling bold and maybe a little desperate, he decided to give it one more shot. But just like the day before, his attempt went nowhere, and he ended up watching her walk away. Around lunchtime, Olaf took a break and settled down with some warm horker loaf with grilled leeks and of course a sweet roll to lift his spirits. Dunking that sweet roll in milk really did the trick. He felt a bit better afterwards. That day it started to snow and the chill got to him, so he took a quick break to warm himself by the fire. He managed to earn 960 gold, not quite as much as on the other days. Afterwards, Olaf went to grab something warm to eat, but as soon as he stepped into the tavern, he overheard Delphine and Orgnar engage in an argument.
You promised me you'd sweep the entranceway.
Yep.
Wait, let me guess. You'll get to it later.
Don't I always?
Don't I always?
I don't suppose I could convince you to take care of it now, could I?
No.
Well, there's something to be said for honesty, I suppose.
It left him feeling down, wondering if it was always this hard for people to get along. He quickly ate his chicken breast with potatoes and carrots, then decided to take a quiet walk alone to clear his mind. The forest was peaceful, allowing him to relax. The evening was chilly, so he spent some time warming himself by the fire. Olaf sat on a stone, looking up at the stars, and his thoughts drifted back to Mabrel. He figured it might be best to stick around Whiterun for a while, focusing on work and maybe finding a way to forget about her. After that, Olaf headed to the Bannert Mare. It was crowded and noisy. Naturally, he had some supper and dessert, and as he was finishing his wine, a girl flirted with him. Whiterun just might hold more possibilities than he thought. Feeling a little more hopeful, Olaf cleaned up, rented a room and went to sleep. By the end of the day, Olaf had about 2,500 gold in his pocket and maybe a spark of optimism for the days ahead. The day started out nice and calm. The tavern was almost empty, so Olaf actually got to enjoy his breakfast in peace. The weather was warm and sunny, looked like it was going to be a good day. But then, who shows up? Sigurd. That guy just marched right up to Olaf's wood chopping block, shoved him aside and took over. People in River would never pull that kind of thing. City folk could be pretty rude apparently. Olaf managed to get his spot back, but Sigurd just stood nearby, clearly waiting for another chance to jump in. Sure enough, he did it again. So much for a peaceful morning. Now it's my turn to annoy Sigurd. Just go away, Sigurd. Thankfully, he didn't bother me for the rest of the day. Around lunchtime, Olaf headed over to sell his firewood. In Whiterun, Hulda buys firewood, and since she happened to be right at the market, he could sell a few bundles quickly. The market was full of fresh food, and Olaf picked up something to enjoy outside. Unfortunately, thanks to Sigurd, he had to cut his lunch break short to catch up on his work. Later, it started raining, so Olaf went to Belletter's shop to find something to cover his head. He was hoping for a hood or a nice cape, but all they had was a fishing hat. He looked ridiculous in it, but hey, it kept him dry. Almost everyone else left the market, but Olaf wasn't about to give up just because of a little rain. Sigurd also stuck around, proudly carrying firewood in his awesome hooded cape. By day's end, Olaf had sold 192 pieces of firewood, bringing in 960 gold. After work, he was chilled to the bone, so he grabbed a hot meal and washed it down with some honey broom meat to warm up. He joined Hulda and Sadia for a quick game of dice and cards, and even walked away with an extra 16 septims. After that, he decided to clean up, but things took a weird turn when he got to the bathhouse. Some strange old lady was there, just watching him. She had this unsettling smile, like she was enjoying the view a little too much. Trying to play it cool, Olaf finished up fast, but right before he left, she actually tried flirting with him.
Well, hello.
Feeling thoroughly creeped out, he decided to wrap up the day. Hulda let him stay in a room for free that night, and he went to sleep with almost 3,500 gold in his pocket. Finally, Friday. Olaf had been looking forward to this day all week. He ate breakfast quickly, hoping that sweet roll would give him a boost of energy. He even got to work a few minutes earlier than usual, determined to finish on time since he had big plans for the weekend. But of course, it couldn't be that easy. Sigurd showed up early too. This time, he took Olaf's spot 3 times, costing him at least an hour of work. Why did this have to happen on Friday? Because of that, Olaf had to eat lunch as fast as he could and headed straight back to work, pushing himself to finish up. Despite his efforts, he still ended up working until 5:20 p.m., 20 minutes later than he'd planned. He was a little annoyed. After all, it was Friday, the most important day of the week. To shake it off, he grabbed another sweet roll and got out of Whiterun as quickly as he could. He was heading to Solitude for the weekend. He found a carriage driver and traveled through the night, finally arriving in Solitude at 4 a.m. He'd miscalculated the timing a bit, figuring he'd get there earlier. Exhausted, he went straight to the inn. Even though he was hungry and probably should have cleaned up, he just paid for the room and passed out right away. It was a little disappointing as he'd hoped to get a long rest, but he also didn't want to wake up too late as it would be a real waste. But he was so tired he overslept, waking up at 2 p.m. So much for an early start to his weekend adventures. By the way, on Friday he chopped 192 pieces of firewood, bringing in 960 gold, same as the day before. Olaf kicked off his weekend with almost 4,300 gold in his pocket. It was so late that instead of breakfast, he started the day with dinner. After that, he figured it was time to clean up and get ready to head out. And what does everyone do on the weekend? Shop, of course! So, Olaf popped into a nearby store and grabbed some fancy clothes for the evening, fine clothes, boots and a hat. He looked great in his new outfit, but decided to save it for later. Right now, he was more in the mood to explore the city. He spent some time wandering around Solitude, but it was getting pretty chilly, so he headed back to the inn. Olaf figured a nice hot bath would help him warm up. The tavern was packed, and even the baths were crowded, but he managed to grab one with only one other guy in it. As he relaxed, he noticed a bath with just women in it. Curious, he decided to freshen up quickly and take a look. The women seemed pretty interested in him, but there was one that caught his eye. The one on the right. She looked familiar, kind of like someone he knew. Olaf figured a drink would help give him a little more courage, so he grabbed a bottle of wine. But even though she seemed interested, she turned down Olaf's offer for a date. The rest of the evening was filled with food, drinks and conversations with all sorts of people. Olaf had plenty of company and heard lots of interesting stories along the way. He even had a chat with a poor man who'd lost an eye during a war. Feeling generous, Olaf gave him a little money and raised a bottle of wine in a toast to his health. By the time he was tired, Olaf made his way upstairs to relax. He checked the lottery, but no luck. He didn't win anything. Well, there's always next time. Olaf finally headed to bed, his pockets a little lighter after spending around 500 gold that day. Not exactly a small sum. Sunday, a bit of a bittersweet day, right? That creeping Monday feeling sneaks in, and for Olaf it meant getting ready to head back to Whiterun with a good bit of time spent on the carriage. But he wasn't about to let that spoil his last day of the weekend. After a hearty breakfast, he stocked up on some extra food for later and set out nice and early. Not too far out of Solitude, he stumbled across a little mill by the water. It was such a peaceful spot that Olaf found himself daydreaming think about working there someday if he ever decided to stay longer in solitude. Nearby, he spotted a couple of fishing spots and it seemed like the perfect way to wrap up his weekend. Except he didn't have a fishing rod. Determined to make it happen, Olaf chopped some wood, headed back to Solitude for an iron ingot and soon had a freshly crafted fishing rod. With the rod in hand, he spent the rest of his free time relaxing by the water, catching fish after fish. After a few hours, he got cold, so he warmed up by a fire, enjoyed his packed dinner and took a moment to just sit and think about his weekend and reluctantly the Monday to come. Around 2 p.m. he decided it was time to head back to Whiterun if he wanted to get any sleep before the work week began. He arrived in Whiterun around midnight, completely exhausted. Starving, he grabbed a quick supper, cleaned up a bit and fell straight into bed. And just like that, the weekend was over and a new week was about to begin. Alright, let's see how Olaf did with his money. After all his spending, he saved a solid 3,665 gold. Not bad, considering he treated himself quite a bit over the weekend. In total, he earned 4,960 gold from chopping firewood, meaning he spent 1,295 during the whole week and managed to save about 74% of his earnings. In Skyrim, you can buy different houses. Breezhome right there in Whiterun goes for 5,000 gold. So, if Olaf sticks to his routine and saves up from scratch, he could afford it in about a week and a half. And of course, there are upgrades and furnishings that cost extra, but it would be a max of 1 week of work. House prices vary. Proudspire Manor in Solitude is the prices at 25,000 gold, which would take around 7 weeks of work to afford. So what do you think? Have you ever tried following a character's daily routine in Skyrim or wondered just how much gold you'd need to live comfortably? Share your thoughts and any stories you've got in the comments. And if there is anything else you'd like me to check in Skyrim or other games, just let me know. Until next time, thanks for watching!